Here we go. Okay, so yesterday we looked at putting decimals in order. Smallest to biggest, biggest to smallest, or just comparing two of them. You will need that for what we're doing today. What we're looking at today is the actual standard for number sense 3. Being able to take a fraction, a decimal, a percent, any mix of those, and putting them in order either from least to greatest, greatest to least, or comparing the two. The 2 steps that it takes to do this is nothing new. Okay? We'll write it down in a second, but the first thing you have to do is change everything to decimals. We covered that the last 2 weeks. You took a test on Monday. Then you have to put those decimals in order, which is what we covered yesterday. Okay? So, when you are comparing or putting fractions, decimals, and percents in order, the very first thing you have to do is change all fractions and percents to decimals. So you are going to change all fractions and percents to decimals. Okay? And you have notes on this. This is what we covered the last couple weeks. You took a test on Monday. So just to briefly review, if we're given a percent, how do we change that to a decimal? This is the easiest one. If I gave you 57%, how do we change that to a decimal? There's no math involved. Jordan, what are you thinking? You thought something. I'd rather you think and be wrong.
So we can't change it to a number?
You change it to a decimal, but it doesn't really require any math. What's that? Oh, I don't remember the number I told you. Do you remember the process? Wouldn't be 5.0 because that would be 500%. Yes. Changing a percent, let me write it because I'm more of a visual person. Let's say I had 65, I'm sorry, I wrote 63. If I wanted to change that to a decimal, what do I have to do? No math involved. Mason?
Get rid of the percent sign and remove the decimal in 2 places to the left.
And he just read exactly what we wrote in our notes. And he's not reading it, but we've done it enough that he knows it. We get rid of the percent sign. We move that decimal point that we never write 2 places to the left. So 63% as a decimal would be 0.63. You're going to have to remember that. Okay? We spent 2 weeks covering that kind of stuff. You have to remember. So that's changing a percent to a decimal. Like I put in the slideshow, you have notes on all of this, or at least you should. What do we have to do to change a fraction to a decimal? So like if I had the fraction 2/3, what would I have to do to turn that into a decimal? I think I'm all out, but you can use, unfortunately, some of that paper towel. If I need to change a fraction to a decimal, what do I have to do? One thing to remember, I talk about this a lot with you guys. Sometimes we just have to try something. There are really only 4 things you ever do in math: add, subtract, multiply, or divide. Okay? So when you're trying to guess what you should do, you have a 25% chance of guessing the right thing. So if I need to change a fraction, such as 2/3, to a decimal, I'm either going to add the 2 numbers, subtract the 2 numbers, multiply the 2 numbers, or divide the 2 numbers. This is where we have to think smart. What would make sense? What operation would possibly give me a decimal? Because trust me, you're not always going to remember what you have to do. But you use your math knowledge to make an educated guess of what would make sense for me to do. So if I add those two, is it going to give me a decimal? No, it's not. If I subtract them, is it going to give me a decimal? No, it is not. If I multiply them, is it going to give me a decimal? No. So what do I probably need to do with those two numbers? Jordan? Yes. Okay. Use what you know and make an educated guess and try something. Now you just have to remember, well, which one do I divide by which one? Okay. And that's where your notes would come in super handy. So, Mateo, if I was going to change this to a decimal, what's going on the inside? The 2. You're taking your numerator, this is how I wrote that, divided by your denominator. These are the exact notes I gave you. Numerator divided by denominator. That is the only thing that will give you a decimal. Okay? 4 operations in math. You got a 25% chance of guessing right. All right? So anytime you want to compare decimals, fractions, and percents, the very first thing you have to do is change them to decimals, which we've covered. Then, the second thing you are going to do is compare the decimals or put them in order. That's what we did yesterday. So you're going to compare the decimals. Hello. Yes. Awesome. I appreciate that. I didn't have time to email you or anything yet. So I appreciate you checking in. Yes. Awesome. Yes. Thank you. Bye. Okay. And this is what we took notes on and did yesterday. And then most of you did on your assignment on your IXL. That's all there is to it. Change everything to decimals, put them in order. Nothing new. We're just putting two things that we've learned together to make it all work. Okay. So if we look at some examples, and I feel with notes, the examples are one of the most important things you can have to look at. Okay. I usually don't do too many, so you don't have a ton to write, but it's always something you can look back at. So if I am given the numbers 4/10, 5/8, and 38%, and I am asked to put these in order from least to greatest. The first thing you're going to have to do is change them all to decimals. 1 is already a decimal. So yesterday we looked at stacking them one on top of the other. Okay, so we can compare them. I would do my percent first because my percent's easy. What is 38% going to be as a decimal? Remember, there's no math involved. Leah? 0.38. All you're doing is moving that decimal point 2 places to the left. Percents are easy to change to decimals. Take the decimal point that's technically at the end, move it 2 places to the left, and you get 0.38 or 38 hundredths. So then 5/8 is the only one that you have to do any math for. And these typically are going to be smaller numbers. So, like Mateo explained to us up here, changing a fraction to a decimal, we are taking the numerator, dividing it by the denominator. So I would be taking my numerator 5, dividing it by my denominator of 8. Now, some of these will go on forever. You don't need to divide for forever, okay? I would kind of go by the rule of dividing it 3 places out. If you go to the thousandths, you'll be able to compare your decimals. And sometimes you won't have to, and they'll end before then. So simple division, 5 divided by 8. 8 doesn't go into 5, goes into 50 6 times, which gives us 48. Okay, this is all stuff we've covered before. Remainder of 2, bring down your 0. 8 goes into 20 twice, gives me 16. Subtract, get 4. bring down your 0, and 8 goes into 45 times. So this one actually ends at 3 places. If it didn't, you could just stop that. So 5/8 is 625 thousandths. Now we're at what we did yesterday. I prefer to add my zeros. That way they all have the same number of digits. Okay? Comparing. Well, the ones don't help us any because they're all the same. This is all we have to look at. Least to greatest. Which one of those numbers is the smallest? Mateo?
3.
3. So that's going to come first. What's the next smallest? 6 or a 4? Jordan? 4. Then obviously the last one is your biggest. So then, when you're putting them in a list, you have to write them as what they originally were. 38 hundredths was really 38%. So that comes first. That was our smallest. This 400 thousandths, as I have it written, was really 4 tenths. And then 5/8 was our last one. Change them to decimals, compare them, put them in order. Nothing new. Questions on that one? Then the second one, if they gave us 1/2, 55 hundredths, and 5/7. Now that we're using fractions and we're actually spending the entire next grading period on fractions, you will learn to memorize some of these fractions and what they are as a decimal, okay? I still remember many of them just because when I was in school, common fractions you just learn. 1/2 is a fraction. You should eventually learn to know what it is as a decimal without having to divide. Anyone have any idea what 1/2 would be as a decimal? Think of this, half a dollar. Dominic? 0.5, 50%. 55 hundredths is already figured as a decimal for us. 5/7, I would have to divide. That's definitely not one that I memorized. Okay? But they're small numbers. It's not going to take me long. 5 is the numerator, so it's going inside. 7 is the denominator, so it's going outside. Okay? Again, I just automatically add 3 zeros in case I need them. 7 doesn't go into 5. 7 goes into 50. 7 times gives me 49. I'm left with 1. Bring down my 0. 7 goes into 10 once. Okay, bring down my next 0. 7 goes into 30 4 times. You can see this is one that is just going to continue. You can stop at the third place value. There's no reason to keep going. You can compare with what you have. So 5/7 is 714 thousandths. So again, I prefer to fill my spaces. So if we look at this the other way I talked about yesterday, zeros don't help us. So I have these 3 numbers. Which is the smallest? I'm going least to greatest. So which one of those numbers, 500, 550, 714, is the smallest? Jordan? Absolutely. What is the next smallest? Mateo? Yes. So actually, these are already in order. Okay, but you wouldn't know that until you get your fractions changed to decimals. So you would have 1/2, 55 hundredths, and 5/7. Okay? Change everything to decimals. Then you can put them in order. You have notes for both step 1 and 2 in your notebook somewhere. Okay? If you need to know what notes you would be looking at, you would look at percents to decimals, and you would look at fractions to decimals. but you should have notes on all of that. So what you are working on today is another IXL assignment. So last night what I did, I went in and looked at your F4, and you have a grade in Skyward just for F4 because that was your assignment yesterday. So today what you're going to work on is your I-13. Same thing tonight. I will look at I-13 and see where you're at. 80 to 89 is a 9 out of 10. 90 to 99 is a 10 out of 10. And 100 out of 99 would be a 12 out of 10. Okay, so what you're finishing today is I-13. Now, what I would do, I-13 and I-14 are extremely similar. I-14 is due Friday night. Once you get used to doing this, it gets a lot quicker and easier. So when I finished I-13, if you have time in class, I would go straight to I-14 because you're in the habit of doing it. You could probably get 13 and 14 done in class. Tonight, I am only grading 13. Okay. And I don't think, I just have one person so far that's at 80 or above on 13. So the majority of you, minus the one kiddo, should be working on 13 first. And then I would roll right into 14. Okay. Otherwise, when you are finished, you need to make sure your con is done. But 13 is what I will grade this evening. Any questions?